Good afternoon, everyone.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello, my name is Touré.
Bienvenue, je suis Nana Touré
I'm the director of the
et je
OECD
suis directrice
Sahel and West Africa
du
Club, the SWAC.
club du...
It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of the 2025 edition of Africa's Urbanisation Dynamics report, Planning for Urban Expansion. This report, now in its third edition, is a flagship publication of SWAC OECD, providing unique and policy-relevant insights on urban development trends across the country. For the second time, we have had the privilege of co-producing this report with key partners who bring invaluable expertise to the table. The African Development Bank, the United Cities and Local Governments Africa, and Cities Alliance. I would like to extend a warm welcome to my colleague, Mike Saluwu, Director, Urban and Infrastructure Division at the African Development Bank, and Greg Munro, Director of Cities Alliance. Thank you both for being here today. What to expect for the next 90 minutes? Let me quickly walk you through our session. First, Greg Munro will introduce this year's report. Then our expert colleagues who have led the report's production will walk us through its key findings. Mr. Philipp Heinrigs, Head of Division at SWAC OECD, will present the major trends emerging from our urban projections to 2050 and what they mean to Africa's urban planning system. Julian Baskin, Principal Urban Advisor at Cities Alliance, and François Yatta, Director of Operations and Technical Assistance at UCLG Africa, will explore the governance implications of this urban transformation. Stefan Atchia, Manager of the Urban Development Division at the African Development Bank, will discuss what these trends mean for financing Africa's urban expansion. Following these presentations, we are delighted to have three distinguished discussants who will share their insights from the front lines of managing urban expansion. I name Madame Rohey Malick Lowe, Mayor of Banjul in the Gambia, and President of the Network for Locally Elected Women of Africa, REFELA. Ms. Kecia Ruth, Executive Director and Founder of the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa, and Ms. Ruth Nakatudde, President of the Professional Urban Planners Association of East Africa and Principal Physical Planner, Wakiso District, Greater Kampala Metropolitan Area. Thank you for being with us today. We are truly honored to have you all with us. After these discussions, we will have a 20-minute questions and answer session. We encourage you to submit your questions via the chat, and we kindly ask you that you include your name and institution when doing so. To close the event, we will hear from Mr. Mike Saluwu, who will share some final reflections. I will be moderating today's session, which promises to be a rich and stimulating discussion. Thank you for joining us. And now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Mr. Greg Munro, Director of Cities Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Munro. I'm the Director of Cities Alliance. And once again, it's a great honor to have joined the rest of the organizations mentioned in producing this report. I was recently asked during an interview, where is the world of urban going? And my response was that the world is doing three things. It is Africanizing, it is urbanizing, and it is informalizing. And this report speaks to those three. So in terms of Africanizing, it talks about the population growth, that we have a doubling of the population by 2050, and in Africa, almost another doubling again by 2100. We will be the most populous continent in Africa by 2100. And while the African population is now about 18% of the world population, it will be by about 40% by 2100. And compare that with Europe, where in 1950, Europe was 20% of the world's population, and by 2050, it'll be 7%, and an aging 7%. Africa's average age now is somewhere around 19 years, and this will continue to drop over the next few decades. On urbanizing, the report details urbanization dynamics and trends, and our cities will absorb 80% of the population growth in Africa. 2/3 of the African population will be in urban areas by 2050, and we will have 17 megacities with 159 large cities with populations of greater than 1 million. In terms of informalizing, at current rates and trends and without considerable planning and intervention, most of the urban growth will end up being sprawling informal settlements and slums with a young, poor population, often with limited opportunities. And that's without intervention. We need to respond. We need to plan ahead and considered urban expansion planning for our urban population growth must be at the forefront. We need to invest in governance, and especially with increased decentralization and autonomy of local government. That is the future politically, and we need to invest in it. We need to reform land governance systems and land tenure systems in Africa. And importantly, we need to integrate social and economic inclusion in our urban planning and policies, and integrate informality into cities' economies, spatial frameworks, and city structures. We also need to plan and prepare for large-scale internal migration. So while this population in Africa will grow, it will not be static. And we already see large-scale internal migration in Africa in response to increased fragility, conflict, climate, and lack of economic opportunities. And that also needs to be within our planning framework going forward. We need to act now. We need to act collectively. And we need to act based on data and analysis. And therefore, this report creates that foundation for us in our future action. Thank you.
Eight minutes?
18.
18, oh, sorry. The floor is yours to present us the report.
Thank you very much, Director Touré, and good afternoon and a very welcome also from me. And thank you for joining the launch of the 2025 Africa's Urbanization Dynamics Report, Planning for Urban Expansion. I will jump right into the presentation and we'll start with the main facts and figures from the urban projections that have been produced for this report before moving to the implications of the projected expansion for planning systems across Africa. To start off with, the background to why this report on planning for urban expansion now. As many will know, and as Greg just mentioned, Africa's total population is going to increase by 900 million people over the next 3 decades. Urban areas will absorb 80% of this growth, making urban expansion one of the defining transformations of the continent. This urban transition is a one-off process. By the end of the projection period, urban expansion will start to slow, and most of Africa's cities will be built. Given the long-term impact of urbanization, coupled with the slowness of the planning process, planning for this expansion must start now to ensure sustainable and well-functioning cities. The analysis presented in this report are based on the most comprehensive view of future urbanization dynamics in Africa to date. The data provides demographic and spatial projections for all of the more than 11,000 urban agglomerations across the 54 countries of Africa. These first-of-its-kind projections reveal important trends and spatial patterns that provide essential insight for policymakers and urban planners. The first headline figure, by 2050, 65% of Africa's population will be urban. Africa will have a level of urbanization similar to the global average of 68%. This is a major shift. However, this figure masks significant variations across countries, and 12 countries will still have a level of urbanization below 50% by 2050. An important element to mention here, and something that is a particular feature of Africa's urban transition, is that this is not leading to a decline in rural populations at the continental level. The rural population will grow by 180 million people, although in 17 countries, rural populations will start to decline over the projection period. Next. This map shows the average annual population growth across countries. The point we would like to highlight here is that many of the fastest growing urban populations are in countries with currently low levels of urbanization. So planning for urban expansion is equally critical in these countries, as they will see the fastest rise in urban population and consequently face high investment needs in urban infrastructure and services. Next. One consequence of the urban population growth is the emergence of new urban agglomerations. At the continental level, the number of cities will increase by more than 2,000 between now and 2050. Next. However, this growth is very uneven, with only 4 countries accounting for 50% of the total increase. And the emergence of new cities is notably driven by a process called in situ urbanization, where rural areas gradually transform into urban areas. And the main driver is a combination of population growth and the absence of significant rural migration. Also, 10 countries will see a decline in the number of urban agglomerations, a point I will return to shortly. Next. A trend first highlighted in our 2020 report, and one that is intensifying, is that 81% of Africa's urban expansion will be occurring inland as opposed to on the coast. And this trend is driven by 3 factors. First, Africa's high number of landlocked countries. Second, the limited coastal orientation of urban systems also in coastal nations. And third, the location of major population basins in the interior of the continent, such as the Great Lake basins, the Ethiopian highlands, and Nigeria. The consequence is that by 2050, 75% of cities with more than 1 million inhabitants will be in the interior of the continent. And this shift has significant implications for driving Africa's continental integration, for instance, notably in terms of planning infrastructure and connectivity in Africa. Next. Africa's urban landscape will be dominated by large cities. We project that there will be 159 cities with more than 1 million inhabitants, and 17 of which will be megacities with more than 10 million inhabitants, the second most of any continent. And beyond the numbers, an interesting aspect to consider here is that some of these cities will be among the largest French, Arabic, English, and Portuguese-speaking cities in the world. They will become key global hubs, shaping cultural, linguistic, and economic landscapes. The underlying dynamic of large cities is that 2/3 of the total urban growth in Africa will be in cities with more than 1 million inhabitants. By 2050, 59% of all urban dwellers in Africa will live in a large city, up by 30% from its 2020 level. And this holds 2 important implications. Firstly, in terms of economic benefits, larger cities, both in Africa and globally, have stronger benefits in terms of economic productivity, innovation, and access to services. Or put differently, they have stronger agglomeration economy effects. In addition, larger cities provide economies of scale in terms of infrastructure and service provision, so lowering per capita investment cost. Secondly, however, is the challenge that this shift towards large cities also creates imbalances within national urban systems, requiring policy interventions to ensure equitable development and connectivity across national territories. The average annual population growth rate of different city size classes are mapped here, and at the continental level, Large and intermediary cities are growing significantly faster than smaller urban agglomerations. Again, visible are important country variations, which notably reflect differences in countries' urban systems. I will now move to what these population dynamics imply in terms of expansion of cities' built-up areas. The headline figure is, we project that the urban footprint of Africa's cities will grow from 175,000 to 450,000 square kilometers. Or put differently, 61% of Africa's cities will be built over the next 3 decades. So this is the challenge that is faced by African cities, but at the same time, this is also the opportunity. The challenge is clearly to plan, finance, and manage growth at this pace and scale, whereas the opportunity lies in building cities that are sustainable, productive, and inclusive from the outset. A second figure to highlight is that despite this expansion, urban areas will still cover less than 2% of the total land area of Africa, yet will house 65% of the population. In terms of urban built-up area growth, there are 2 facts to highlight. First, urban area growth exceeds urban population growth. And second, there is no one-to-one relationship between area growth and population growth. And this is shown in the figure here, where we have the 10 countries with the fastest area growth. 2 comments on this. First, the faster area growth compared to population growth is a result of our projection methodology. The methodology has a linear density decline, or more precisely, when population doubles, the built-up area will triple. This is a relationship that has been observed globally and that we have applied here as well. In other words, the relationship between population and area expansion can be modified. And we are currently working on different density scenarios to see and analyze what the implications would be in terms of expansion. A second point, the pace of area expansion is a variable that can be strongly influenced by policies, notably as concerns the urban planning system. And part of the variation in the figure on the slide is notably due to differences in political context. So in summary, these figures are the most likely scenario under no policy change. Thanks. In terms of differences across city size classes, a similar pattern as for population growth is projected, with large and intermediary cities seeing faster area growth than small urban area. The fastest area growth will be observed in cities between 1 and 2 million inhabitants. A particular important feature of our projections is that we have integrated all built-up areas in the modeling and looked at their interaction. A major result of this is that we are able to calculate the importance of spatial processes, notably fusion. So fusion happens when existing settlements are absorbed during the expansion process, leading to the formation of one single agglomeration. And this is illustrated by the animation at the bottom of the slide. And fusion is a major driver of area and population growth in Africa. We calculate that for large cities, fusion accounts for 32% of the demographic growth and 43% of the area growth on average. Fusion is particularly important for large cities, and this is due to the fact that they're generally located in more densely populated areas, surrounded by more existing cities and settlements, and that their larger area also increases the probability of fusion in the expansion process. However, also for intermediary and small urban areas, fusion contributes a non-negligible amount to expansion. The example of Kampala illustrates the importance of fusion for large cities. Kampala is surrounded by a range of other cities, and over the next 30 years, Kampala will fusion within 49 existing urban agglomerations and form one single urban area with 17 million inhabitants. One important implication of fusion is the need to integrate existing structures and planning strategies, which will require coordinated urban planning across administrative boundaries to ensure connectivity and create functional urban areas to benefit from the agglomeration economy that these larger urban areas offer. The slide also brings me back to the point earlier on the declining number of agglomerations. So this will notably happen in countries where fusion will be more pronounced and more cities being absorbed into larger ones. And this is notably the case in Liberia, Rwanda, and Cameroon, for example. So in the projections, the decline in the number of agglomerations is purely the result of a spatial process. An extreme case of fusion and absorption is the formation of mega agglomerations. The development of mega agglomerations is driven again by the expansion of urban agglomerations, coupled with strong population growth in the surrounding areas, leading to large-scale fusion and the emergence of continuously built-up areas over vast distances. Nairobi is a prime example of an emerging mega agglomeration projected to merge with Kisumu more than 300 kilometers away. These mega agglomerations will have 57 million inhabitants by 2050. Other examples in Africa include Onitsha in Nigeria and Bujumbura in Burundi. Such mega agglomerations present unique planning challenges, notably in terms of connectivity, transport systems, and governance. At the same time, they present particular environmental considerations that need to be included in planning strategies. In addition, a particular challenge is that these emerging urban units are generally not captured by official statistics and definitions, making them difficult to incorporate into national and regional planning frameworks. And this, although they account for a large share of the total population. I will stop here with the presentation of the key findings. However, more data and analysis can be found in the report, which is freely available on our website, and all the data can be downloaded from the Africa Polis website. This brings us to the policy implications of these urbanization trends. In the report, we focused on 3 policy dimensions: urban planning, urban governance, and financing that are crucial in managing urban expansion and are also intimately linked. I will now outline the key policy considerations for the planning systems, while my colleagues will address governance and financing aspects. First, the major implication of the projections is the need to make room for Africa's growing cities. As in other world regions, the projected urban growth will unavoidably lead to expansion. Given the scale of the projected growth, this has to be a major area of focus. In addition, given the pace of urban growth and the slowness of the planning process, it is imperative to start planning for expansion today. The capacity and cost effectiveness of urban planning to impact on environmental sustainability, urban economies, and inclusive economic development is highest when done before expansion happens. Next. A condition for the planning system to be effective is to strengthen its relevance. Urban planning is a very powerful tool to shape productive, sustainable, and inclusive cities. Policymakers have to recognize the capacity of urban planning to have a real impact. Furthermore, strengthening the capacity of the planning system will require increased staffing and funding for planning agencies. To provide an idea of the needs, estimates for Nigeria indicate that there is a lack of 20,000 urban planners across the various levels of government in Nigeria alone. It will also require policy and regulatory reforms to strengthen its efficiency and speed. Again, crucial given the pace of the projected expansion over the next decades. A crucial element in the regulatory environment, also for governance and financing, is land governance. Another aspect that emerged from our analysis is a need to renew planning approaches. Notably, we see a need to develop new ideas and programs that are better suited to local realities and context, to better leverage data and new technologies, and to systematically include environmental and sustainability considerations. In terms of the key focus area for making urban planning more impactful, we have summarized them by planning for reality. First, in terms of spatial dimensions. How much growth will happen and where will it happen? Our analysis of past and existing urban plans in Africa has shown that in many cases, plans underestimate the actual expansion that will happen, leading to badly dimensioned plans. In addition, in other cases, plans were initially correctly dimensioned. However, with the processes being slow, by the time implementation was happening, they were outdated and outpaced. So there is clearly a need to better anticipate the actual needs. And this is, for instance, an area where data and data capacities will be crucial. Furthermore, the gap between planned and actual expansion is also due to the fact that plans are often constrained by administrative boundaries, which rarely capture the actual functional realities of cities and its inhabitants. The images on the slide for the Mombasa Gate City Master Plan 2050-2040 and our projected expansion from Mombasa provide an idea of the size of the gap that can exist. Second, in terms of people's reality, here the main issue can be captured by a lack of efficiently dealing with informality. What is summarized by the term informality is the reality of the majority of Africa's urban population. Planning approaches have to include informal settlements and the needs and economic realities of its residents. And thirdly, urban plans need to be based on the financial realities, both in terms of the available public resources for investments in servicing, but also in terms of people's financial capacities to pay for these services. So this is the end of my presentation, and I will hand over to Julian Baskin from Cities Alliance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philipp. Julian Baskin and François Yatta, you have the floor for the next chapter.
All right, thank you very much. We have the slide, please, the first slide. So the future of African cities will depend on how we manage the urbanization process. And good governance is the key to successful urbanization. Good governance is really characterized by three aspects that we simply have to strengthen, because right now we are not fit for purpose. The first aspect is, no matter what the legal frameworks are or the institutional structures, we have to have decisions that are socially accepted, decisions that people believe have been made in their interests. The second aspect is we need to have national urban policies, city development strategies, land use plans that everyone sees their lives included. In other words, we need to have inclusive responses to urbanization. And the third aspect of good governance is we need to develop the capacity through partnerships to make sure that the projects that are identified in the planning processes are turned into investments and actions on the ground. Good governance is essentially the key to effective delivery and response to urbanization. Next slide. In order to achieve good governance, there are some things we simply have to get right. Right across the board, there are inadequate human resources at the local government level to respond. The second aspect is that the very structures of most local governments reflect a system where there are far too many unskilled workers and not enough senior management and middle management people or managers involved. This means that decisions that are taken that are often not implemented because that middle management section is often not there or is underrepresented. The first thing we have to get right is we need to make sure our local governments develop the capacities to respond. Next slide. The second thing is no local government nor national government can respond with enough capacity on their own. Partnerships and multi-level governance is absolutely key. Right now, Africa is not waiting. There are good examples across the continent, and inclusivity and the development of structures that are part and parcel of governance, not isolated structures, but structures that are part and parcel of good governance need to be established. They need to be established at the settlement level, where slum dwellers need to be partnered with to start developing local upgrading plans. They need to be done at the city level, municipal forums, where people can come together to discuss city development strategies and land expansion plans. And they need to happen at national level with national forums, where people can get involved, all the different stakeholders, in the development of national urban policies. These forums are a key way of ensuring that whatever decisions are made are as inclusive as possible, and that whatever action takes place is as local as possible. In Uganda, we have examples where the municipal forum are used to oversight infrastructure projects to ensure that those projects are done according to the specifications that they are planned for. So the communities become part and parcel of the process of implementation. In Ghana, we have examples where communities are engaged in selecting the type of appropriate technologies used in sanitation and other aspects of urbanization to ensure that there's wide-scale acceptance of the type of technologies used in the upgrading of cities. Next slide. Most planning in Africa is taking place in data deserts. The Cities Alliance did an evaluation of the situation and found that something like 55% of the data we were presented was simply unreliable. Only 14% of the data we found was able to be used. You cannot plan without data. We need to invest in making sure we have the data necessary for planning. And we need to do it in different ways. We need to mobilize at the local level to use communities to map and profile communities. And we also need to use it at higher levels of technology to get the bigger global picture of the urbanization process. But we cannot continue planning in the data deserts that we have at the moment. Next slide. Key to everything is that we need to stop considering informality as the enemy. We need to stop putting across the idea of world-class cities in contradiction to inclusive cities. Informality is a reality and it can be leveraged. We need to be looking, it's simply not true that there are no services in informal settlements. There are services, but they are provided informally at bad quality and high price. But there are members of the informal economy that can be leveraged and supported to provide better quality services at low price. Informality is not the enemy. They are part and parcel of the partnerships needed. We need to start seeing slum upgrading as being a principal element of the work that we do. Slum upgrading, we need to make sure it happens so that we don't end up with huge backlogs going into the future. I'll now hand over to François Yatta.
Merci beaucoup, Julian. Bonjour à tous.
Thank you very much, Julian, and hello to all. I will continue in French. Following what my friend Julian has just said, I'd like to say that in addition to local factors, which are participation, capacity, and data, an efficient urban governance is also related to national factors, the first of which being the urban strategies. So urban strategies are very important because they define the framework of urban governance. Unluckily enough, in 2021, according to a publication of Cities Alliance and CGUL, only very few countries have an urban strategy, and only 4 out of those have a sufficient and quality strategy. And this is very bad because we are more than 10 years of the adoption by the United Nations of the new urban agenda, which was adopted in 2016. And it considers that the urban question in Africa is an essential structural aspect of the progress of the continent. So the elaboration of urban strategies in Africa is very low because of the negative debate on urbanization and cities. Urbanization is not viewed as an opportunity rather than as a risk, and even a process that will disturb the national environment. Yes? Did you want to say something? Oh, okay. I now have my next slide. The second factor at national level is financial decentralization. We noted that in several African countries, financial decentralization did not follow the transfer of capacity to local governments, both in terms of financial transfers or own revenues of cities. we note that only 4% of the countries have a transfer system which is transparent, efficient, and predictable, and only 4% of the African countries have a local taxation which is decided by local governments. Decentralization doesn't have a marginal cost. It's only a local transfer of resources that were implemented at national level using the skills and responsibilities transferred to local governments. So this financial need arrives, as our friend Philipp said, when the process of urbanization in Africa requires major investments at a level never reached below in any area of the world. So this gap is very difficult to fill. Next slide, thank you. The third factor is the national institutional environment. I will not get into the detail of that, but the measure of national institutional environment was based on about 12 criteria that covered transfer of resources, transfer of capacities, skills, taking into account the global agendas such as climate, gender, the making decentralization a constitutional element. And when you look at the slide here, you see that out of the 53 African countries, we've worked on 53 African countries except for Libya, for the reasons you understand, only 12 of those 53 countries have a favorable institutional environment in favor of cities and local governments. And this environment can be measured by the margin for maneuver which is given to the people in charge of African cities so that they act properly for a good management of urbanization. And despite the fact that the environment is not in majority favorable, we do note an improvement. Since 2012, for instance, we had 86% of the countries that had an institutional environment which was not favorable to local governments. It was 74% in 2018, 68% in 2018, and 62% in 2022. So it's decreasing. And despite all that, 42% of the countries have improved their scores during the period. And we regret that because 10 years after the adoption of the African Charter of Values and Principles of Decentralizations, local governments in 2014 by the heads of states of African countries, we note that decentralization remains still today to be implemented in the majority of the African countries. The transfer of powers to local authorities, the creation of subsidiarity within the public sphere remains to be implemented. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Yatta.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yatta. Thank you for your presentation. Stefan, Atchia, please.
Three elements on the financing African urban growth are in this document. The first one, next slide. The first one is the current levels of spendings are too low. Now, this is something that we know already, but this is now put clearly on the report. The current investment levels are insufficient to match the urbanization trends and the climate challenge, as mentioned by Philipp at the beginning. 159 cities, over 1 million, 17 mega cities, and the bulk of the cities are actually currently in the making. The needs are huge, between 130 to 170 billion USD annually to bridge the gap. And this is also on the main challenge of all the cities that are above 1 million, which is the famous invisible secondary city cohort that we have on the continent. And financing urban expansion requires long-term approach. Financing basically is a long-term activity. And what we see here, and the numbers are in front of us here, that when you look at the spending per capita, is that Africa is about $104 per capita, on the continent, whereas the Americas are 4 times, 5 times above, Asia almost 7 times, Europe 17 times, Oceania 18 times, and the world average about 8 times. Now, I'd like to make a small remark that when we looked at the past dynamics that we did together with OECD, this number has grown. But the question now is, we need to make it double faster over the 2030, 2040, 2050. Those numbers need to be doubled every 5 to 10 years to be able to catch up on the investment that is needed. Next slide. The second element that comes out of the report is to invest more. So we know where we are coming from, and that means that we need to address the infrastructure gap. National and local governments, especially on the reform of the fiscal policies, as François just mentioned, to increase domestic revenue collection, tax governance reforms, and key drivers. This is something that we have been working on for many months now and a couple of years, and as presented at the Africa Urban Forum in Addis, this is one of the keystone. Our colleagues from the OECD will know this is something kind of reforms that they have done in the OECD countries many years ago, where we on the continent are things that we need to do now. A lot of our countries actually have not done and what we call fiscal decentralization, allowing cities to be able to raise revenue. That means a revenue system, digitalizations, be able to connect better with the National Revenue Authority and the likes. Climate finance is extremely important, be able to go to the market, to be able to emit obligations, bond, and create investment levels. And finally, public funding, leveraging public funding with concessional finance, just like that we provide here at AfDB, to attract massive investment for the private sector. Again, the key element here that the report goes to is that cities are on the continent a large untapped source of financial leverage. What is expected in OECD countries when they provide municipal bonds to raise infrastructure, we have not done that. Apart from a few countries, the South Africa and others in North Africa, the rest have not done that, and that is something that we need to move very quickly. Next, number 3 is to invest right. I think that's something that's close to the heart of Julian, Cities Alliance, is to invest right. That means to invest, the investment must be aligned with the needs or realities and the business that maximize impact. Large projects are very important in big cities, but going from this cohort of secondary cities, we must have investment that are locally rooted, that are accelerating infrastructure delivery and better supporting our economies. Prioritize investments on urban productivity. Transport is one of our big investments of all of us. Housing is a big one, and and our colleague Kecia will be able to talk more about this. And food, we need to be able to feed the cities, and often it's the cities that need to be able to feed the cities, especially on using solid waste and composting and the likes. Invest in informal private sector. We mentioned that they are filling the gap that is left often by not having the public involved in the private sector properly organized. So the informal sector needs to be enhanced and expand investment to drive economic growth and support the city development. And finally, focus on spatial and socially inclusive investment. And then all investment have to be looked from the spatial inclusivity. And you look at the spending sector commitments last 5 years. You look at the transport has one of the bulk, energy, ICT 13%, water 10%, multi-sector. But all of them have to be done in a way that makes sense to the city. So the spatial approach, even on corridor investment, linking Abidjan to Lagos, which is basically a large source of development, which what Philipp called the fusion development. Those have to be spatially inclusive and socially inclusive. So those are the kind of 3 elements that we touched on the report. And of course, there's a lot more detail in the report. Next slide. I think that's the end. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for the straight to the point presentation. And thank you all for your very detailed and insightful presentation. Just a quick recap. I mean, what we've heard right now is that the report is evolving around three key elements. How do we plan urban planning, urbanization, in anticipating, in building strategies, in building policies and policy reforms? The second pillar would be the governance issue. And I appreciate the fact that it was flagged very clearly that governance key to a successful urbanization, and some different elements that were touched upon, being inclusive, having a local involvement in it, and which was reminded again here right now. And the fact also that informality is not the enemy. And I think it's important to remind that one over and over again. All the issue of decentralization that Mr. Yatta mentioned, and the transfer of competencies to local collectivities, and the issue of subsidiarity, which is central to it. About the financing aspect, we need to finance more, we need to invest more, we need to leverage public funding with private sector investment, and also invest locally. And all these three elements I hear evolve around other three key elements, which are data. First of all, the reliability of data, which is key. The second element I would say is infrastructure that goes with urbanization and urban growth, but overall human development. I appreciate, Stefan, that you mentioned right now, these people, this population need to be fed also. How do we produce more? So food security comes into play naturally. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to the discussants. The first being Madam Rohey Malick Lowe, Mayor of Banjul. And also with your hat as a president of the Network for Locally Elected Women of Africa. I would like to ask you one question, Madam Mayor. What are the key bottlenecks preventing the delivery of inclusive cities, supportive of everyone, women and children in particular? You have the floor, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon from Banjul, the capital city of the Gambia, where the city that I call the feminist city is simply because, not because it's led by women, but because it is a caring city. I'm more than happy to be a part of this conference. So first and foremost, let me take it in the perspective of Africa, and also let me take it in the perspective of Africa, where we have our cultural and traditional norms telling us this is where we have to stop as a woman. So women and children are the ones that are most vulnerable when we talk about urban development. The delivery, let me talk about the key among these is the lack of reliable, for example, gender disintegrated data. So here we talk about data. So we have a huge vacuum when we talk about data. And data is the most important, because without the data, you cannot know, you just do things blindly, and you don't know where your people are, you don't know how to solve the problem, you don't know which problem to solve. So this is one of the most important issue that I have in Banjul. So Banjul is a youthful, we have a youthful population, but how will you know what the youths want, where are they, the age differences? You cannot know without data. Additionally, we have what we call the inadequate financial and infrastructural resources. This also, we have a very, very huge constraint when we talk about financial and infrastructural resources. because most of the institutions that has the financial power are not coming to the local government. They instead prefer to be with the national government, or better called the central government. So most of these people, they want recognition. They are not interested about impact. So for them, they don't care whether the woman is suffering or the young one, the youth are suffering. For them, it's all about how they can have recognition from the central government or from the national government. So local government is not high on their agenda, and this is where the impact is. When you want to have impact, you have to go to the local government. So I don't understand why these people think that if they have to do something in countries, they have to go to the national government where there is absolutely no impact. So let me talk about limited capacity also. Capacity also is a big problem. We have a big gap when we talk about capacity. Capacity in the sense of councils are most of the time doing things blindly or doing things without capacity. But again, we have seen international organizations giving out capacity building, but they prefer to give it to the central government. So, and we have weak governance, as I said, weak governance structures. Weak governance structures is also one of our problems, and this goes back to the capacity. Social cultural barriers, which is also another problem. Rapid and unplanned urbanization is another problem because we don't have the finances to do those things. Which is very rapid, but do we have the finances to take care of this? My answer is no. And also we have this is the cost why our children are suffering, why the youths are suffering. We have, for example, built about 23 classrooms through our EU project funding, but still we cannot equip them because we don't have the resources. So I think we can hear until tomorrow, but the big problem here, I will also blame our international partners because they will keep how can we as mayors plan our cities when all the fundings from our partners are going up to the central government? They tend to forget that local government is where the impact is. Youths are dying in using the back way to do the illegal migration. This we have seen is happening. The women are suffering. Some of them are not educated. They cannot have skills because the council itself doesn't have the capacity, doesn't have the know-how, the finances, the capacity to take care of the problem of these people. I think we have to start moving from up and trying to go to the local government where you can see the impact. But my question again is, the international donors, the international partners, are they interested in the impact are they interested in impact, or are they interested in their relationship, the so-called diplomatic relationship with the central government? To be quite honest, especially we as female mayors and living and being in Africa, where the traditional and cultural norms are telling us this is where you have to stop. And still the international partners will give us credit, will tap on our backs to say, okay, thank you so very much. You are great as the first female mayor. But don't you want us to multiply the female mayors? Is that not a priority? We know very well, and this is scientifically tested, that women are less corrupt, women are more committed, women have empathy. So why are our partners not coming to the grassroots? Come to the grassroots, especially to female mayors, where you will have the empathy, where the impact is, where less corruption is. But they prefer to give the central government, the national government, the money, and they will buy cars, they will abuse women out of it, they will use our youth out of it, and they will stay there and keep laughing on us. To be quite honest, this is my honest opinion to say that part of our problem as local government is also our international partners, and they will tell us, okay, our rules doesn't allow us to come to the local government. So they can only come when there is flooding or there is war. This is the time that they will try to go and see the mayor or try to have a contact with the grassroots. So I want to take this opportunity to say to our partners that we need you, and we need you urgently. We are dying, especially as women, as female mayors. We are dying. And if I say we are dying, we are suffering, I mean we are suffering and we are dying. We are tired from the stigma, from the stereotyping, from everything that is going on, because they are telling us we as African women deserve to be at the kitchen. So come to our aid. You should understand that if you give them the money, if you give them 100, before it comes down to the grassroots, it will be one. It will be one, and there will be no way that one can make an impact. So on that note, I honestly want to thank you so very much. I'm so passionate about women leadership, and I cannot do it alone. We need your help. And as I said, the youth of Africa, the youth of Banjul need international partners to help us. The women are crying. We are in the month of women. We are celebrating women, but we are celebrating naked.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much for this powerful...
Without being happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor, for this powerful, honest, and so passionate statement and evidences you've provided to support actually the findings of the report. Again, I appreciate that you flagged the centrality of data, which is key here, and again, which is important to support and bring evidence and bring to light the vulnerability of the youth, of children, and of women, and also the governance and the necessity to bring and build more and more decentralized cooperation. And I think it is key. This is a very important reminder. It again comes back to the statements and the findings of the necessity to work locally, to build locally, to plan locally, and to finance locally, which is key. The governance and the necessity of infrastructure also, which is key. But what you've mentioned also is the social and cultural biases, which also contribute to this vulnerability, is key. But overall, the question of impact. And I appreciate that very much that you flagged that. Thank you very much for your very insightful contribution to this discussion, which I believe is to be continued with you also again. I jump to the next discussant, who's Kecia Rust, to talk about policies again. Kecia, in your opinion and from your experience, what policies are needed to scale urban investment? We talked a lot about, financing, the necessity to fund locally, to leverage public funding, public financing, which is not enough, obviously. So what about focusing on infrastructure, for instance, housing? Can you give us your experience about, policies that are needed to scale up urban investment, particularly in housing? You have the floor, Kecia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and hello to everybody. It's really an honor to be able to speak with all of you about this topic, and I'm completely excited about this report. Beautiful maps, and so interesting about a way in which you can start to grapple with the reality of urbanization, which we know, and I'm going through CAHF's yearbook. We produce a yearbook every November where we list key data that's relevant for housing, and within it, we have the urbanization rates, and you've got a rate of 5% urbanization in Uganda. if you turn that into people, it's almost like a continuous queue of people walking into the city. And then you think about the housing impact that that's going to have, not to mention everything else. And so I really appreciate the work that's been done in this report to first of all, to present the data in a way that is consumable and that you can contemplate, and then to think about the impact that has in terms of the different areas. To your question, the policies to scale urban investments. I mean, in principle, if there's population growth, there should be increasing investment because there's a market opportunity. You've got all these people moving into cities, and they're not just moving in with their hands held out. We do imagine that mistakenly, but they're moving in as productive members of society, or potentially productive members of society. And depending on the way in which the city is ready for them, they can contribute to the growth and development of that city while they continue to consume resources. So the hope, of course, is that the more people will lead to more growth and development, and then it fits. But it doesn't always work that way. And that's because sometimes the processes don't align. The rate of urbanization is faster than can be handled. The direction and the place that it happens in is different. And so a key thing about is urban policies that literally respond to what data is telling us about how much and where and why and in what circumstances. So policy that not only deals with yesterday and today, but can also look forward and create opportunities. And in that, I think my favorite slide in the first presentation was, in fact, the last slide, which was about planning for reality. And we have so many ideas of what should be. And then there is what actually is. And if we look at the spatial reality and how the cities are growing and then merging, very frightened about the idea that we have data for this city and this city, but we don't have data for where they meet. And we've got to deal with that. And then the people's reality. And when we think about informality, which of course it's everyone has said it, it's fundamental and it's a pejorative term. We think informality is bad. And in fact, I'd say it's creative and it's survivalist and it deserves attention. But it's not only on the demand side. As Stefan said, it's also on the supply side. And you've got so many players who are delivering houses or delivering products and services that are related to the urban space, and they're doing it as an individual. And that also deserves investment. But investors who want to come in have no way of touching that person's business because it is informal or it is somehow not connectable. So urban policies that recognize that and find a way to facilitate. I mean, the job of our governments is to connect capital on the one hand with activity on the other. That's one of the job of our governments. And so to recognize the informality, not as a demand problem only, but as a supply opportunity, because people are making a plan in the context of limited products and services that exist at the moment. They're being entrepreneurial. So how do we embrace that informality and support it by recognizing that this is the way that our residents now operate? That's just the way it is. And I think so much about governance at city level, at county or state level, and at national level tries to ignore informality, and then, as Julian said, also make it like a bad word, when in fact it's the reality. It's there, and it is worth leveraging because there's opportunity there. A second place where I think it's quite critical, and this is also part of the reality, is to recognize that not everyone in those dots on the maps are owning. They're renting. And in fact, the majority are probably renting. If you look at Kenya, you've got 78% of the urban population, according to the last census from 2019, is renting. And of that population, 89% are renting from private individuals. So there again, we have a set of so-called informal relationships, though it is collected in tax data. So there is a level of regulation that applies. Well, we need to understand that when people are moving into urban areas, or when urban areas themselves are evolving, a significant proportion of households who are existing within this mobility are likely renting. And that means two things. The one is that they're accessing accommodation and they're paying for it, which is interesting because there is a transaction that's there that they're participating in. And then secondly, the landlord is realizing an income. So there's a flow of funding there that creates another kind of opportunity that cities need to think about in terms of infrastructure, in terms of taxation, in terms of service delivery, and so on. So recognizing it's not all ownership, it's also rental, and there's so much more we need to understand about that. The role is to facilitate investment in that, not necessarily to control, because some of the informal rental is affordable because it is under the radar. But one wants to make sure that there is enough investment that can flow into that. The third area, I think, that's critical relates to urban planning, and that's been raised as well, and Stefan went into that quite a bit, also around infrastructure. But urban planning that incorporates residential as a significant land use. We do not have cities that have residential areas, commercial areas, retail areas. They're all mixed up together. And sometimes in a way that is challenging for health and safety, right? So that in some cases you have industrial mixed in with residential, and there's a health and safety management issue there. But just to recognize that as the investment in infrastructure and as the planning is happening, to recognize that residential is going to be there too. And if it hasn't been planned for, it's going to appear, in which case it will probably be less orderly than a growing city would like. There's also an amazing opportunity to leverage investment in infrastructure to cross-subsidize the infrastructure needs of households in residential, because residential can just be on the side of an investment that's been made in other forms of property that might realize higher returns, commercial and light industrial and so on. So thinking very carefully about the pacing of how investment is going to happen depending on the kind of land uses there, and recognizing ways in which that can support investment in residential, which should be in those very same places. The fourth point is music to my ears. Everybody has said it. I'm going to say it again. I don't think it's enough that we all say it, because we say it and then I do see this. Not enough happens, is data. And the beauty of data is that, I mean, everything that's been described, and you think about these growing cities and the merging cities and denser cities and so much happening so quickly, that creates conflict. It creates competition over land resources, for water and sanitation resources, land rights, and so on. And if there isn't a sound data platform that everybody can negotiate around, instead of the conflict being natural and manageable about the answer, it becomes chaotic because it's about the question and who knows what is true. If we establish the facts with the data, we can have much better managed debates around the tension that is necessarily happening. And so data transparency is a critical issue, and cities can really lead in that as well, and data collection around that. To the mayor's point, everything happens at the municipal level, and that then creates a great opportunity, and I would like to say a responsibility for cities to collect and share their data. And François, to your point, for UCLG to define the metrics, I would like, for example, 3 data points for every city to be put into an international database for this continent. And it's the value, the number and the value of building plans passed, and then the outcome of buildings delivered. We have no data on housing starts. anywhere. And houses should not be so hard to count because they're visible. You can see them right there. So, and cities, I understand that cities don't often get the opportunity to approve every building that goes up. But we don't even know the extent of that if we don't know how many have been approved. And when I compare census data of the number of new households with housing delivery data that a government puts forward, for example, in Kenya, there are these huge gaps between it. And it's really hard to know what to believe in that context and how to engage with that. So I would love those data points. Looking forward for next steps, almost done. I'd like to know in terms of the database, how much deeper can we dive? Can we go, how local can we go in the analysis of the data? And that, if it's just using the Africapolis data, that may be interesting because it would offer me a few metrics at a very local city level. But can you imagine, in this room, we have Cities Alliance, UCLG, AfDB, who else do we have? If all of those data sets were integrated on a GIS platform so that I could go and take a look at the pipeline neighborhood in Nairobi, which I'm doing right now, and understand everything that everyone else knows, but all in one place about that place, it would be so helpful. And that would then give the mayor the data that she needs. Well, not the Kenya example, but in the Gambia, that would give her the data that she needs in order to make specific decisions around the kind of buildings that are going up, the kind of investments that are being made, where she wants to engage further with the private sector. There's so much to be learned from the way in which the private sector is making its investment. And a lot of that information is in data sets that right now aren't connected. So then
Thank you. Kecia, I'll have to stop you here.
Can we compare what the countries and cities know with the data that's here? And I think that that's something that I would like the cities to do, make that comparison to validate it. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kecia, for your very insightful, perspectives and experience. And I think it's very key, the centrality of data that you have mentioned here. But overall, what strikes me is the usefulness at the end of the day of the report that has been produced, and how can it be used to influence policies used by practitioners, decision makers. And I think that's the next step to be discussed also. It is important that we're here to produce data, not for the sake of producing data, but to end users, actually. And I think it's key that you mentioned that, not only the transparency of data, the accessibility of data, but also comparing, like you mentioned, can we compare data to confirm what is in there? And I think that will take it a step further. There's so many things that you've mentioned here, the informal sector that is
can I
central also
intervene,
and fundamental.
Can I intervene?
We'll give you the floor later on, Madam Mayor, because there will be questions and answers. There's one more discussant I would like to give the floor to before we pass on to Q&As, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's okay. I just wanted to buttress and the data issue again. Just because, as I said, having about 72% of my population of Banjul as youth, and I want to buttress to complement what she's saying, because if you look at our elections, our presidential election in 2021, REFELA was able to influence 51,000 voters, women that has never ever voted. But we did this through research and having the data in our hands. So again, I want to emphasize the importance of data. That data is also power, and indeed is part of the voices that women, the tool and voices for women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Thanks for this reminder. And I think it is key. I mean, everything is evolving around data. Our next speaker is Ruth Nakatudde, who's the president of and Professional Urban Planners Association of East Africa. So there has been a lot about data, planning, policies, governance, and financing investment. My question to you is actually the first and foremost, how do we plan? How can we plan for Africa's urban expansion? Can you give us your insight about that, Ruth? Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and all the speakers. I love the zeal and the insights here. Everything is really very good. And I thank you for the opportunity you have given me to be part of this. I am Nakatudde, and greetings to you from Uganda. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. How do we plan? Planning is very, very key in all this. And I want to bring the issue of looking at cities as systems, planning for a system, that if you deprive one part of the system, all other parts of the system are likely to fail. African cities, as we have all noted, they have been growing rapidly, unplanned, with all informal settlements, with all the poor urban conditions. But the key issue is poor planning. And how do we plan? All the points have been highlighted. And I want to also pick it up from where Stefan left it. The issue of strengthening the relevancy of planning. This is one thing that has been put aside in all local governments and in all levels. But how do we strengthen urban planning? And I want to suggest that as we endeavor to strengthen urban planning and its relevancy, I think it is important to look at it holistically. How do we plan holistically? How do we deliver cities in a holistic, well-planned, and a long-term perspective of planning? Of course, the issue of data comes in, and it is a challenge, but it needs to be addressed. Because as you all know, cities grow over time. They start with informality and then end up as mega cities. So what do we have to do? We have to do the holistic planning, include all the facets of planning, from social, economic, environmental, governance, digital systems. All these have to be brought together on the table to ensure that they are all included in the planning cycle. The other issue that was pointed out is the problem of slowness in the planning process. Yes, it may be that planning processes are slow, but I think it is important that we look at the long-term perspective as we narrow them down to implementable levels. What do I mean? That the planning horizons, if we are planning for, say, 50 years ahead, how do we break it down to the local person to know that in 5 years, these are the projects that are going to be implemented? That means as we do those planning horizons, let us link them to the implementation stages and levels. Like we all have like the 5-year development plans, 10-year development plans. So even these spatial plans, all the local the national, regional plans have to be integrated and aligned to the implementable levels of these governments to translate from the national to local area plans, action plans, and even to project plans for implementation. And that also takes me to the issue of integration. How do we integrate after we have planned? How do we choose projects for implementation? Are they really integrated? Do they deliver? Or does a project that is implemented, does it respond to the other facets of the urban structure? Are they linked or do they coordinate? So we need to come together on the table. Planning is not only for planners, but all of us are planners, and we need all to come to the table. We strengthen the need to plan together as one with a long-term vision of the African cities. And another issue is about the informalities. Informalities, actually, they are not a problem, but an opportunity. And these are pointers to the trend of development in our areas. Where you see an informality, it is an indicator that development is going into such direction, but we do not give them attention. So in the end, they turn out to be problems. But how can we treat them as opportunities for growth? We need, I think, to address them in our plans by regularizing them in our urban regeneration programs, slum upgrading programs. Let these informal sectors or settlements be regularized and integrated in these plans. And lastly is about the inclusiveness, stakeholder engagement. I want to point it out that we normally do stakeholder engagements. People may be involved in the planning on the onset, but what happens at the end tail of the planning process and project selection, the prioritization and selection of projects are not normally linked to the plans that are prepared. So the selection of these plans should be based on these plans, and also the communities be involved in decision-making through commitments. How do they make commitments to be part on delivering the urban plans that have been put in place? And I think that will help us to close the gap between the planners or the communities and the and the government, which delivers most of these projects, to ensure that it is actually a plan for the people and it is inclusive. I want to thank you very much with that.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And what your final statement rings about to my ears, plan for the people, which is very key. I think it's important that all the points you mentioned here, there's a convergence of points of all the speakers, the discussants, the presenters, and the findings of the report about the necessity to plan, the need to be inclusive, the importance of data. I'm saying it not in the right order though. The importance of inclusiveness and the need to embrace the informality and work with the informal and try to see how we can regularize, and that is important. So I know we're running behind time. We have many questions online. I don't know whether we have time to respond to any, but what I would like to suggest is to have another webinar where we can bring up some of the questions, because one, for instance, that I've captured here is, what are the solutions that are most adapted to Africa in terms of urbanization or responding to the urban expansion in Africa? And I think these are questions that could take us, again, another round of webinar, and I think it's worth asking also to colleagues whether there would be an opportunity, and I think there should be an opportunity to engage a conversation about some of those areas and have a deep dive into each of the areas, whether it is informality, whether it is data, whether it is governance, decentralization. These can be standalone discussions that we could have, and I think we commit to organize such webinars to get back to the different speakers and discussants to respond to some of the key questions that are asked. And I really would like to apologize to participants if we're not able to respond to all the questions, but I think it is worth coming back to the table and discussing openly some of those questions. So if you don't mind, I would like to hand over to Mike Salou for the final remarks from the African Development Bank. Mike, if you're with us, you have the floor. And really thanks to all of you for those very insightful experiences, sharing all these experiences. Mike, you have the floor.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the honor to really say a few words here before. Oh, sorry. Yes, I should put my camera on. That now. Okay. I hope you can see me. Okay. So thank you very much, and I've been carefully listening to this very rich exchange and ideas and sharing of experience from all stakeholders here. Some of whom I know very well. I was in Banjul last week. I met Madam Mayor. We had a very, very good discussion there, and also some of the other colleagues here online. So I think we have had a very rich discussion today, which will inform the way we actually tackle this issue of urbanization. This report that we will publish will be a very good step in that direction. The synergies and also the complementarities that came out from the exchange that we had here today, I think for us is something that we really value. Stefan has also spoken about the critical need to address the infrastructure gap that is required in urbanization. This, for us, we believe will be the backbone of everything you do. You talk about planning. Planning is really key. I totally agree with all these speakers that really mention the critical importance of planning. The governance also is key. Governance, I was again in Senegal last week, just before I went to the Gambia. The issue of governance, the new authorities over there are very, very keen on really make the governance work for local communities to really play their role in the national development. And of course, the financing aspect also is also equally important. We are the African Development Bank. Of course, this is our bread and butter. This is what we do best. So we have to think about innovative way to really put on the financing for our municipalities and cities and so on, because at the end of the day, financing is what will really make all these programs work and deliver the promises of a sustainable urbanization that we all are caring for. Last but not least, the issue of human capital and also capacity building has been fairly discussed, and I think this is also very important that we build capacity for our cities and the municipalities to really tackle the urbanization challenges that we're talking, because at the end of the day, the decision needs to be made, the policy guidance, all that need to be made. The formulation of public policies also need to be made. So capacity is also very important, and that's what I think the forum like this will really help us to achieve. So with that, let me again reiterate the African Development Bank full support for this, and then very, very rich conversation that we had here today, and looking forward to continue working with you and also the launching of the report. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks for those remarks and appreciation of your contribution here and the African Development Bank support to this report. I'm going to close this session, and I would like to extend my really, really deepest gratefulness to all of the participants and the panelists and the discussants, the time devoted in listening and contributing. Now, I believe that the insights from this report, particularly the Africa Pulse data, give us the tool to act strategically and proactively, and I think it is important. The challenge now is turning data into action from what I've heard from all the participants, ensuring that city leaders, policymakers, and investors align their decisions with long-term urban development goals. And I think it is important, not just urban development goal, but sustainable development goal, because I think it is inclusive. With that, I would like to thank everyone and see you soon for the next chapter on the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.